You want to introduce yourself a little bit and talk about who you are and what you do?
My name is Sue Kullerd, and my day job is I'm a mental health counselor in private practice in Georgetown and Round Rock, Texas. And by night, no, I guess I'm also in my day job, I'm a shaman, practicing shaman as well. I do fold in shamanic practice in my therapy practice, sort of as an adjunct therapy. So that's who I am and where I am.
Okay, all right. So I have a lot of questions for you. Hopefully you've had a little bit of time to think about all of this. So you and I know each other, I think, Soul Collage first, actually,
Yeah.
and then we both became students of the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. So we know each other through that. And I know that you're a practicing psychotherapist. So I have a lot of questions. Just, when you say adjunct, what exactly does that mean? And how do you, sort of integrate those two things? Well, I have a lot of questions. Let's just start there.
Okay. Well, so an adjunctive therapy would be, for example, if someone's seeing it. So in practice, if someone would be seeing a therapist maybe for trauma, and the therapist doesn't do maybe EMDR, eye movement desensitization therapy, they would send their client to me just to do the EMDR part of therapy. So it's a second type or a third type or a fourth type of therapy that you can add to someone's treatment plan to make sure that they get all the help that they need. So where I might use shamanic practices, I might do trauma work with someone, do traditional therapy or do EMDR therapy. And then when we're done, I might do a soul retrieval to call back part of their soul to themselves, to welcome themselves back home. Now that the body has been healed and the mind has been healed, to welcome that soul part back and to integrate. And it's been pretty cool. Some pretty neat experiences have happened by doing that.
Okay, all right. So do you see it as another modality, or is it a distinct sort of path or practice for you?
Yes, both. Because sometimes as you and I have been trained through the foundation, that when you do this sort of work, you have the person's permission. So then you have to bring up in therapy, talk about what shamanism is and how I practice it and how I use it. And they have to give consent for it. That's part of the ethics of psychotherapy also. Also the ethics of shamanism, that we don't do anything without someone's permission. So I have used it in parallel. It's like, hey, I'm getting a feeling that maybe it would be good for me to do a healing extraction or do a soul retrieval for you. What do you think about that? And talk to them about it. And they say yes, and it helps. They notice a difference. I've had some interesting experiences with that as well. Because in shamanic practice, remember, we're working in the spiritual realm, whereas in psychotherapy, we're working in the physical, mental, intellectual, and psychological realm or emotional realm. So we're just adding another layer of treatment, if you would, to it. And so it is adjunctive, but it's woven throughout everything that I do, because it is a practice.
All of those things really are very interrelated. It's maybe the fault of modern psychotherapy that it often leaves out that whole spiritual layer. So
yes.
You feel like it's really bringing a comprehensive focus to your practice then?
Yes, definitely. It's integrating more quickly, and which is what clients need, because when they have experienced a trauma or loss of some sort, of course, in shamanism, we call that soul loss, and we don't talk about it in that way in psychotherapy. But when I talk about it with clients, and I don't do this with everyone, but when I talk about this with them, it's like a revelation as they go, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. And it really rings true for some people and resonates. Yeah.
So when you do that, you have your client in front of you. Do you really do the work there, or then do you offer it and then do it in distance?
I offer it there and I do it long distance. There are a few people, or one or two clients, who have wanted to be present when I did it. And for me, it's such personal internal work to do this work. It's really hard for me to do it with someone present, although I've done it. But I feel like it's richer and deeper if I do it on my own, in my own space, in my own time. And again, you and I have been taught that you don't do any shamanic work if you're not in your power.
Right.
And if have been working with people all day long and someone comes in at 6 o'clock and they want me to do shamanic work for them, I'm not in my power to do it.
Right. Yeah, you're exhausted. Yeah,
Mhm.
by the end of that day. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And then when you come back to your client, how is that process for you when you?
Well, as we've been taught, we tell them the work is done, and I
Mhm.
might give them a little bit of a story because they always want to know something. And I might say, well, recently I did it for a client who's going through some marital issues, and she said, well, what happened? I said, well, a cougar showed up and did this, and it's like, wow. And perhaps that's her spirit animal. I don't know, but I haven't worked enough in teaching her shamanism for her to understand that. If she's interested, I will. But
Mhm.
it's definitely something that I don't push. If they're interested and curious, I will discuss. I will talk about it. And if they want to follow that path, I'm more than happy to teach and hold space for them to journey. And I've done that for a couple of clients. Otherwise, they just want me to do the work and then report back.
Mhm. Okay, so that's what they want.
Mm-hmm.
See, I had a lady contact me a couple weeks ago, and she wanted shamanic work, and we talked back and forth, and ultimately she decided to choose somebody else in a different country.
Mm-hmm.
And so he did distance work for her, and he told her basically, like, lay down at this time,
Mm-hmm.
and for an hour he did this work. At the end of the hour, he called her and said, okay, it is finished. And
Mm-hmm.
then she told me, I don't think he did anything. I don't feel any different, and I don't know what happened. And
Right.
so I'm consistently finding in my practice that this is a little bit of a problem, because I think that people need to anchor that in. And for me, it's as if I'm like going and retrieving a seed in essence and
Mm-hmm.
bringing it back and planting it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if there's not some tending that's occurring afterwards, people, don't necessarily know what to do with it, or they don't feel any different. And so, I mean, do you find that, I mean, because you're having your clients, on a regular basis, so you're also doing psychotherapy, and I think that probably makes a big difference.
Yeah, because some of the work that I do is just skills building, teaching them how to cope with certain things or how to look at, reframing, how to think about things differently. And so that also gets folded in with the shamanic work, and because it certainly is a different way of looking at things, isn't it?
Yes, yeah,
And
yeah.
so, yeah, and I agree with you. There does need to be some tending to the soul once it's returned. And I do tell people that now that this soul part is returned, because a lot of times it's the child soul part. Go to the ball pit at McDonald's, or go play with some Play-Doh, or go really attend to that child part that came back. Because what you need to do when your soul returns to you, it needs to be a safe place and a loving place to return to. And so you're right. There is some tending that needs to happen.
Yeah, yes. Well, and even some preparation work sometimes before, really, to sort of get that ground fertile to accept that seed,
Right.
Because whatever reasons that the soul part left in the first place, unless those conditions are, ready to be dealt with, it's not gonna stick, really.
Right.
I think, so yeah, it does require some kind of before and after care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I thought that was interesting that the woman told me that was her experience, because that is how we've been trained, but it's very stripped down. In practice, it doesn't seem very practical, I guess.
Right.
It's
And
very foundational.
It doesn't feel very compassionate. Remember, the foundation of shamanism is love, compassion, healing. Yeah.
Yeah. So how I know that you and I have talked a little bit about that line between being a psychotherapist and accepting clients. Some of them have insurance, and then being a shaman, and putting yourself out there as a shaman. And that's not my situation, so I'm wondering how you sort of are navigating that professionally. And
Yeah, interesting you should say that, because I do charge for shamanic work, for shamanic services. It's that exchange of energy. We have to have an office, all those things. Just like in the, thousands of years ago, if someone came to see the shaman, they would bring him vegetables or bring him a goat or something to pay him for his services. But insurance-wise, let's see, how have I done this? Well, because if someone just calls me on the phone and they have insurance and they just want to talk on the phone and have me do shamanic work, I won't use their insurance. If they're coming into my office and I am counseling them and doing psychotherapy with them, and we're using shamanic work as an adjunct, then I will, because I don't do the shamanic work in my office. I'm seeing them. I'm seeing the client in my office and doing the psychotherapy work in the office. And that's kind of how I keep it separate. And that's how I can hold to my ethics and hold to the ethics of the insurance companies and what they're looking for. Because one thing Charles did tell us, and I remember him telling me, is you need to keep your shamanic practice and your therapy practice separate. And I think, and what I have learned the hard way is what he meant by that was keeping them separate in the public business world. Of course, they blend in the office, or they blend in my practice, but I do keep them separate business-wise. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example of why this is. I don't know if this is one of your questions, but I think it's very relevant. This is a very, very, very hard lesson for me to learn. About a year ago, I was seeing a client, and she was in a very abusive relationship. She got pregnant, had a baby, and it just didn't work out. And they ended up going to court for essentially, visitation, custody, all of those things. And I had on my website, my therapy website, one sentence: I'm also a trained shamanic practitioner through the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. If you're interested in this, call me, let me know. This was on my therapy site's website. Well, the legal counsel for the father or his therapist found that on my website, and they brought that to court, and my client lost because I went to testify for her. And she ended up, she didn't have to do this, but she chose to give up her parental rights. And to me, that is so heartbreaking that I didn't tell her, I didn't ask her, I didn't say this. I was said, are you sure you want to do this? But it was because the father and the father's father were just such bullies, and they used the legal system to bully her. It was horrible. And so I took that sentence off my website, and now I'm in the process of creating a separate website, separate shamanic practice business, completely separate.
Okay. And
I thought Charles was right. And it's unfortunate that people don't understand what shamanism is or how it can help.
Right, right.
Tragic.
So people aren't going to know who Charles is. He's our most beloved,
yeah.
our most beloved instructor, teacher, mentor at the foundation. So, yeah.
And then I have another hard lesson learned, and something that I've changed and adapted in my practice. Another client who I still see currently, I did a soul retrieval for her, and she's married, and I don't want to give a lot of details of the case, but I did a soul retrieval for, from several people in her life, and she was very on board and she loves the practice, and she loves the ideas and the concepts. And one of the people I did soul retrieval from was her husband. Well, come to find out, after that happened, she experienced a big difference. But what happened was her husband was so enmeshed with her, and I didn't have his permission to do soul retrieval for him. You know how in a marriage you might have soul exchange or soul loss? I just did soul retrieval from him, but didn't do the soul retrieval exchange back to him. And so what happened, he relapsed, and he almost died.
Wow.
Is that because of the soul retrieval? I don't know. Could you say that perhaps his soul had so much soul loss that that when I removed or retrieved her soul, that he just like fell apart? It's quite possible. And so what I've learned from that is, if I'm working with another woman, same situation, but he's not quite as unstable, I told her I will not do a soul retrieval until you and your husband are in couples counseling.
Okay.
And he sees someone, and he's doing some work to try to separate out that enmeshment and that soul exchange. I won't do it. I just won't do it because it's too. It scared me. I felt so responsible for it. Now, was I responsible for what happened to him? No, that was a choice he made. Those are life choices he's making. Is it that he gives up too much of his soul to people? Sure, probably. And he's not my client, so I don't know how to address that. But this is the way I've chosen to address it, is to not do the work. And that is fully within my right and within the ethics of shamanism to say I can't do that work.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the learning process of, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And, those hard lessons are, I think, sometimes the ones that teach us the most, really.
Yeah.
About where those lines are and being sensitive to that, where they are.
And that's really what the compassionate work is all about, is that our job is just like in mental health and psychotherapy, is to do no harm. Same thing in shamanism, is to do no harm. That is the top goal. Our goal is to always help and heal and love and bring compassion and solve problems, and to do no harm.
Yeah.
And I believe that strongly.
Yes, I do. I do as well. Yes.
Yeah. So hard lessons.
Yeah. I didn't write down a list of questions. I thought we would just kind of, have a nice casual conversation. But I mean, you've answered a lot of my questions. Do you care to share maybe some, personal experience without obviously giving away details?
Well, you mean with clients or for myself?
Well, maybe both. Either one. Yeah, actually.
I was going to say, part of our job, because you think about historically what shamans have done, and you think back thousands and 10,000s of years, is their only job wasn't healing. I mean, that wasn't their only job. Their job was to, journey and find where the next buffalo herd was, and to provide food and shelter for their tribe. And again, shamanic work is about helping the whole community. So, and then just the ceremonies, the fire ceremonies and the moon ceremonies and all of those things, and celebration of life transitions. I think about girls in the tribe transitioning from girlhood to womanhood, and boys transitioning. All of those community celebrations. To me, that's the fun part of it. And I'm thinking more of like different indigenous tribes, the Aboriginals, the Native Americans, the Northern Europeans, the Celts. Every group through history has had their traditions and their ceremonies and their rituals. And that is the beautiful part of this, is that it just brings the community together, and it's very loving, and it's fun, and it's celebratory. And we forget about that part sometimes.
The ceremony part. Yeah. Our culture has become really, I think, stripped down from a lot of that, and we're missing it. I feel like we're missing it. Yeah. So it does. It brings us together in a sense of community, and brings the sacred. That was one of the things that Charles really taught me. Was he often would say, sacrifice makes sacred, and so it's ingrained in my mind. I think about that all the time.
Yeah.
But just bringing the sacred into the mundane parts of life.
I was at a workshop on Saturday, and this is not really shamanic, but it is kind of. So it was Anita Johnson. She's an eating disorder specialist. She's written a book called Eating in the Light of the Moon. And she was there with another local social worker in Austin, Alyssa Shapiro. It was a combination of working with the medicine wheel and movement. And that's another thing I've learned recently. I have kind of dropped away from movement in my shamanic practice. But as we learn that, Charles says, dance with your animals. That's how you develop relationship with your spirit guides and your spirit helpers, is dancing with them. And movement is so important. But what was so cool about this workshop, it was this, Dr. Anita Johnson was teaching about the medicine wheel, and how she applies the archetypes of maiden, mother, queen, and crone in the directions. And she called in the directions using those. And that was at the center of our learning that day. And then it was all interspersed with movement. We would get up and turn on music and move. And it was there were 25 women. It was very much a community experience. And it was like, she had a mandala in the middle of the group, but it was like sitting around the campfire, and it was all women. It was, think about the red tent, And she talked about, all when we're maidens, when we first start our periods, and how that should be celebrated. It should be a transition ritual or ceremony, and we don't do that in our society, and how women can develop eating disorders around it. And I thought, this is it. This is shamanism at work,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's so true. And it's important to bring it to our community and even our families. My granddaughter's 6, and she lost her first tooth, and we made it into celebration. I printed out a lot of pictures of her from like infancy all the way to her age now. And we made sort of like this, I laid out my buffalo hide, and we made an altar. We placed each picture down there, and then an effigy of her tooth. And, I sort of made a Despacho out of it, in a sense. And then we drummed and rattled and danced around it, and we really made it a celebration, because to me, this really was a rite of passage from early childhood, into now she's in this middle childhood stage. And so, it was a lot of fun, and she enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it. And I'm really happy, to be on this path. I mean, it's hard. It's hard work. I mean, as you know, but the champagne part of it, the fun part of it that connects us and, brings that joy. I think for me, I'm learning that ceremony is very much about joy.
Yes.
Yeah. It's
the joy of life. It's the joy of life and living. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to turn the tables and I'm going to ask you a question because I do have a story to tell about this. So if you would talk a little bit about what Despacho is, because I did this with a client and I want to tell the story, but I want people to understand what that is. And I like the way you describe it.
Okay, yeah. So the Despacho comes from the Quero tradition, which is the Upper Andes in Peru. A lot of people confuse, they hear Peru and they think the ayahuasca, the lower basin shamans. Actually, the Quero typically don't use ayahuasca. So, when you think of Peru, they're the ones we see, with the llamas, and they have the very colorful textiles and, very distinct costumery. They're just very fun, playful people. One of the things, they have like over 100 different types of despachos that they do, but a lot of them are really centered around gratitude. So they have a paper, they lay it out, and then they have, items that they place, and they actually create like a mandala in the paper, each item representing a prayer or something that you're grateful for, and then they fold it up and bind it, and they either will bury it depending, or they'll send it off down a river, or they'll burn it in a fire, and the smoke sort of represents the prayers drifting off into the heavens. So it's a beautiful ceremony, and it's very creative, it's colorful, it's fun. They often use fresh flowers, so it's really fun to do that. And when we went to the Soul Collage retreat last year, we kind of did a community despacho, and it was really fun. Everybody just walked around on the grounds out there and collected things out of nature that spoke to them or stuck out to them in some way, and added it to this growing mandala. And by the time we were done, it was a beautiful artistic expression that everybody contributed from their time there, and connecting with the land, and just our gratitude of being in community and being with one another. It was beautiful. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I remember that, and I loved it. And then we folded it and tied it up, and then we burned it in the evening fire. It was so beautiful. I loved it so much. Yeah. So I took that idea. Then I had a client that I worked with since probably 5 or 6 years, and she has dissociative identity disorder, and that's usually happens. So it's what we used to call multiple personality. So it's a very serious dissociative disorder. It's our mind's way of protecting us and being able to go away in a situation that's so horrific that we don't have to experience it. And so as a child, she experienced some pretty horrific trauma and abuse. And we'd worked together for a while, and part of her acting out with this is she would become suicidal, or she would self-harm, and get drunk. It was pretty serious, pretty awful. She was hospitalized a couple times. But somehow we worked through all that, and she got to a place where she was pretty much integrated. And I thought, what a great way to do the finishing touches and put it all together and have the experience. And so one of our last sessions together, I told her to bring pictures and mementos and flowers and candy and all kinds of things to create a despacho. And we sat opposite each other on the floor in my office, and we just made this despacho bundle together. And it was just, so the things she put in, she talked about each item, and I put in a few things. I said, this thing reminds me of you, or makes me think about you, and it's just so special. I'm getting tearful just thinking about it. And together we bundled it up and tied it up together, and I told her, I said, I don't know if I did it on a new moon or a full moon. I said, I'm going to burn this on a fire. When you're releasing, that's the full moon, right? So we're going to release, right? And be thankful about your journey and the progress that you've made. And so I burned it on a full moon out at Lake Georgetown. And then I went back the next morning and got the ashes and scattered them in the lake. And I told her, after I'd finished. And it was amazing. And she said she felt different after I did that.
Wow.
And there's been no more acting out. Now she has normal problems. She gets mad at her husband, and she... normal marriage arguments.
Wow. Yeah. What a profound story of healing. So you really use, and I think a lot of people too, they use ceremony at the beginning of the process, and in actuality, a lot of times, it comes at the end. Like I hear that a lot with cord cutting. People will try to do cord cutting, and to me, it feels very premature. And to me, like ceremoniously, cord cutting should come actually at the end, you know, sort of like you're signifying that you've already done this work and this transmutation, and now we're like making it official, you know, like in a marriage vow, you know, and that sort of commitment's already there. You're just kind of coming together and, you know, bringing everybody into this statement that you're making. And so I think that was a really good example of how to use ceremony towards the end of a process.
Yes.
You know, to celebrate the work.
Right. And the soul retrieval, when you've done the work and it's safe to come home, that's when you would do a soul retrieval, not in the beginning of your work.
Yes. Yes.
So the other thing I was going to talk about ceremony was this workshop that I did with Anita Johnson and Alyssa Shapiro and 25 other women. There was one point, it was just very powerful emotionally. I mean, a lot of people dipped into some really deep places, and there were a lot of tears. And Anita Johnson talked about that this had happened to her at another workshop that she did with, I want to say, Judith Dirk. Do you know that author? Mm-hmm. Judith said at one point in the ceremony, everybody, all the tissues and the tears, and she turned her drum over and she said, "Women's tears are sacred. Give me those tissues and I will burn them." And so same thing happened on Saturday. And Anita told that story. I said, you know what? We have a full moon on Wednesday, you know, the big super red moon that we just had. Mm-hmm. I said, you take all the tissues, and I took things off of our altar at the end of the workshop, and I burned them again at the full moon. And it's that releasing, mm-hmm. part of that moon cycle, part of our, you know, medicine wheel. It's powerful. Mm-hmm. I love doing things like that.
Yeah.
I know you're doing these interviews for a particular audience for a magazine. Mm-hmm. And some people who might be interested in shamanic practice or have never done it, I think this is important to talk about, just to tell people, hey, this might happen to you and it's okay, it's normal, and not freak out. And what I'm talking about is dismemberment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So my experience with dismemberment, I never really experienced. I know you told a story once that you had in one of your journeys, and you really weren't sure what was happening until you got educated, until you got
Yeah.
But this was at the 2-week healing intensive in Virginia, and where we specifically our intention was to ask for a dismemberment, rememberment. Mm-hmm. And so for people who've never experienced that, people think dismemberment, wow, what is that? And it's basically, well, how would you describe it? I mean, not gory.
Well, it can be. It can be very gory. Yes. Yeah.
But it's metaphorical. It's symbolic. It's a breaking down and taking apart of yourself to be put back together in a new way, in a new healed. I mean, it can be very, very healing. It can be a very healing experience. And it was for me. I don't know what it was for you. And maybe we can each tell our dismemberment story.
Yeah.
But, so if this happens to you where you're cut up or you're eaten by something, don't be frightened. That means that you're being helped to heal. That can be a very healing experience. Don't be frightened of it. Because there are some things that can be very, I mean, in shamanic work, I mean, it can be overwhelming if you don't understand what's happening. And so the teaching that I had was that dismemberment is a breaking down or a breaking apart. And on a journey, it could happen any way. I was eaten and swallowed by a huge snake. And then some other things happened. And then a deer gave birth to me at the other end. That was the rememberment. And I remember in the class, I took the class with Nan Moss, and she told us, your intention is to ask for dismemberment and rememberment. You ask for both, and your helpers will do what you ask. And the guy sitting next to me, you know, we were sharing about it afterwards, and he says, I just was dismembered. And he said, nothing else happened. And she said, well, what did you ask for? He says, well, I asked for a dismemberment. Mm-hmm. Well, you were supposed to ask for a rememberment as well.
Yeah.
But I remember when I went to that class, I was having so much knee pain, and I'm 58. I'm not that old, but I was having a lot of knee pain. And after the dismemberment, rememberment, that my pain was gone, and it hasn't come back.
Wow.
And it was so healing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And the other thing in the middle of that is you're dismembered, and then you no longer exist. And so what happened to me is I experienced, I don't know what you call it, the void, the mm-hmm. nothing. You experienced that, and it was truly nothing, but it felt peaceful. There was nothing scary. And then suddenly I was being given birth to by a deer in the woods. But that brief moment of the void was kind of profound. And those are pretty neat experiences. But if you don't know what it is, you're going to go, whoa, what's happening?
Yeah, yeah. My first dismemberment, I didn't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like panicked. It actually caused me to stop journeying for about a week because I was like, you know, I was doing healing work for somebody and when this happened and I was dismembered, the person I was working on was dismembered, and I was just like, oh my gosh, is my shadow, like what's happening? And I'm projecting this stuff, and you know, it was really scary because I didn't know that that's what it was.
Yeah. So if this happens to you on a journey, don't worry. Be grateful. You're going to experience a wonderful healing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's very empowering, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think of, because I always like to think of the audience and what do they need to do? What problems might they be having? How can I help, or how can we help them? Do you have any ideas or thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of like a more general audience, you know, one of the questions I think that would come up is, you know, well, you know, you're having all these experiences in the spiritual realm, this dismemberment and, you know, soul retrievals. How do you really know that that's real? You know, how do you know that that's not just your imagination? Or, I mean, you've given a lot of testimony how you've, you know, seen the fruits of it, you know, in the real, how it's really, you know, you felt healed and you've seen the benefits of your clients, but you know, there could be a disconnect for a lot of people in that faith spectrum. And a lot of people, you know, even shamanic type people will just assume, oh, it's just, you know, your imagination, you know, they want to sort of put it in a Jungian context of,
or it's coincidence, or I just happen to feel better. Well, I don't know. And that's a good question. I don't know how to answer that question. Because what I've been taught, and you know, you've been taught, is that it's not about faith or belief. It's about direct experience.
Mm-hmm.
And some people, because I have clients who are stuck in that, well, this is my belief, this is my faith, and it can't be anything else. And to talk to them about, well, what was your direct experience? And they don't even know how to think about that or reflect on that. It's a different way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the answer to the question is, it's the direct experience. I went into that class, that 2-week healing class, and came with severe knee pain, crippling knee pain, and came out of it with no knee pain.
Right.
How do you explain that? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's the work that I did. It's the direct experience and the direct result of the work that I did.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So practitioner to practitioner, I guess then my question would be, you know, when I'm doing journeying for somebody, I'm having a direct experience. But as this woman told me a couple weeks ago, she laid down for an hour and the shaman called her at the end and said, okay, it wasn't finished. She didn't have the direct experience. I'm sure the guy didn't take her money and just sit there and watch TV. I'm quite sure that he did something and that he, you know, ethically was committed to her care, but she didn't experience it. And so that's an interesting dynamic too, is where's the disconnect, you know, where do kind of we begin and someone else ends and all that, you know, in terms of how we're really affecting other people in our work.
Well, and that's interesting. I think that's more a question of technique because I don't tell my clients to do that. Because because it sounds like he almost wants them to journey with him, and I can't do that at a distance. I feel like in my mind that if someone wants to have an experience, then they need to journey. And I'm going to be taking the 5-day harness shamanic counseling.
Oh, are you? Yes.
Yeah, because I want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And basically a shamanic counselor is someone who holds space for someone to journey. And then I'm there afterwards to help them process it. It's not to give them what I think it is to help them work through their direct experience and hold space for that. Mm-hmm. And so I think what he's trying to do is to co-journey. And how do you do that if you're not in the same space? Yeah. I'm sure it's possible.
Yeah.
But, and I guess maybe it's his intent. What is his intention? And maybe he's not making his intention clear to her. Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to journey, you and I both know before you journey, you better have a clear question or a clear intent before you journey. Because otherwise you're just going on you're surfing or something, sightseeing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think it's a problem of technique. And like I was saying, I think that, her story really demonstrates to me like the need to build that connection before. And, that's going to look like talking. It's not going to look like you laying down and me doing shamanic work. It's going to look like talking, where we're talking about what are the symptoms that you want to, relieve, and, all these sort of things, and building the groundwork. And as that's happening, I'm kind of doing an assessment. Is this ground fertile for this soul retrieval to take place?
Right.
Sometimes it's not, and I know that we're taught that it ultimately is up to the spirits, and it is. But I mean, I think that, as practitioners, we bring also, our experience. I mean, it's to me, shamanic consciousness is not like here or there, it's a constant stream.
Right.
And when we alter consciousness to go into the spiritual realm, that is intentional, and it is, we're separating out our time to do exclusively that. But in between the time when we're having to like be in our ordinary consciousness, we're still open and having a stream of the higher consciousness that's coming through. And, I think that's, for me, an important part of my practice is connecting with people and making sure that the ground is fertile, and explaining to them, this is what I'm going to be doing, and expect maybe this, expect that, we don't really know, and then tending to them after, not just saying, okay, it's finished, and, bye, thanks for your money, see you later. Right. But helping them to invite that in, and keep it there, and hold it, nurture it, and tend it.
Exactly. And what you're talking about is building relationship. And that's what you do in psychotherapy. And that's really what you're doing in the way that you do your work as well. I had a woman call me who was a co-friend of our friends. And she's older, and she had some pretty severe back pain. So she knew of me through her friends. And so they all recommended her to call Sue. And so I talked with her, and I did like a therapy intake. Tell me about your history. Where's this coming from? And she had been a psychotherapist. So she knew the questions I was asking and what I was going for and listening for. And she says, I don't think that has anything to do with my back pain. I said, okay.
Yeah, it's that psychotherapy model.
And so, I just tucked that all away, and I did the work for her, and she got relief.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wouldn't just say, okay, what's your problem? Tell me what's going on. What do I need to do? It's like, no, I need to know more than that.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's strictly shamanic, if that's the shaman way, and maybe because the way I practice do my shamanic work is colored by my therapeutic work, my psychotherapy work. Totally, right. Like you're saying.
Yeah. And that's interesting. That's why I really wanted to invite you on and have this discussion, because I think it's really an important thing of making these distinctions, and also understanding. I think I'm coming to understand, because what we learn in the foundation is very stripped down. It's very technical. It's very insulated. When you go out into the world and actually try to practice it like that, I'm not finding that that's I have to sort of add to it these layers of my experience and wisdom and understanding. And I think it's meant to be that way, in essence. That's why it's core shamanism. They're not trying to create carbon copies. Right. But to just give us the foundation and the technical skill then to go out and build. So these are a lot of questions that have been swirling around in my mind as I'm, going out and practice and having these experiences and saying, well, that doesn't really work. It requires more. And then trying to, many times, because I'm not a licensed therapist, I've stepped back and asked myself, am I out of my scope of practice? Because it feels almost psychotherapeutic to me. But I'm really coming to understand that I think Western shamanism is just fundamentally different than Siberian shamanism or Mongolian shamanism or Peruvian shamanism. It has to be, because of the culture that we're in, and, the way our society and our community is built, and, and so it looks a lot more psychotherapeutic than it will maybe in other cultures.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. I had a question that bounced off of what you were saying, and now I lost it.
Oh, okay.
Let's see, what else? I don't know. Do you have any other questions?
Well, I mean, I just going along in that same vein, do you feel comfortable with that? I mean, do you feel like there has to be a clear distinction between shamanic practice and psychotherapy? I mean, we talked about how they do sort of blend, and I'm not talking about like in the legal I mean,
Right.
that's a whole different,
Yes.
audience and avenue, and that's a valid concern. But just in terms of your practice, do you feel like these things have to be?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I remember when I first started working with Charles, and because I really see him as a mentor, and I would go to him and say, I have this, and it was a case I talked about earlier, my DID client, and I went to him early on and I said, how do you think about this case shamanically? How do I think about it from the shamanic point of view? And I really was working on how to train myself to think, I know how to do it as a psychotherapist. How do I do it as a shaman? And that was really, really helpful for me. Because I grew up Methodist, I grew up in the Christian tradition, and I have a way of thinking. And this is just really just like shamanism just rocked my world and just opened things up and really widened the view for me. And so it's a way of thinking about your case, or thinking about your client, thinking about them in a different way. It's like, okay, here's some, therapeutically, here's some psychotherapeutically, here's some skills and things I can teach them. And this is how I think about them in a shamanic way, and what will help them or what could help them.
I know that you work with a lot of DID clients. We've talked a little bit, about some of your work, and I'm curious about that from a shamanic point of view. How do you see that condition? Because that's another aspect, being a therapist, you have your DSM codes and, all that, technical billing part of it. And, that doesn't necessarily correspond with the shamanic view of the human being at all. So how do you put that together?
Well, I think about, when I take someone's history, I listen for trauma, and, trauma can take many forms, and can, someone who's very, very resilient can stand and handle some really horrific things and not be affected by it. DID is that diagnosis is someone has experienced so much trauma and such horrific trauma that their mind can't handle it. And so our mind has this, and I tell my clients, your mind has this beautiful way of protecting you. And you're experiencing something in your body or in your environment that's too much, your mind is able to split off, and so that you don't have to experience it. Of course, that creates problems later on when they're, different personalities come out and they're dissociating and checking out and not being present. So it's a matter of not being present, but what causes it is soul loss, basically, or soul exchange, with a parent who is abusive, or a boyfriend who is abusive, or something. And so it's about soul loss, and it's about retrieving the soul. But if they're still living in the environment, soul retrieval is pointless. Like you said, the soul will just say, adios, I'm out of here. I'm not coming back. So you've got to make the environment safe for them. It's that attending that you were talking about. You got to make the environment safe. Do they need to get out of the environment? But shamanically, it's about making the person's environment and body safe for the soul to return, to come home. So that's the shamanic way of thinking about it.
Yeah. And so when you say soul loss, though, that's what the piece I'm trying to understand. What is that? I mean, it's obviously fragmentation, but each individual personality, is that just one soul fragment in it? Is it many different aspects of soul? You said there was some soul transferring. So, I'm curious what.
Soul exchange with our parents. Like, we all experience soul exchange. You experience soul exchange with your husband, right? I experienced soul exchange with my ex-husband, with my son, with my parents. We all experience soul exchange. And then sometimes that's on purpose. We do it with full experience and knowledge. And sometimes we do it unconsciously. But I think when there has... So the parts, as far as the different parts, so the way that you would work with that psychotherapeutically is you want to get all the parts, you want to have awareness of all the parts. And I tell people, we want all your parts on a team. It's you, all your parts, me, any other support people, you're on a team. And ultimately the goal is, of course, the goal is not always integration. That's not really truly the goal, but it's co-awareness, co-consciousness. And so some of the parts are very destructive and saying, if you tell what happened, then you need to die. And that's why people become suicidal or they self-harm, because there are parts that are saying, if you tell anyone what happened to us, we will die. And so I'm going to make you kill yourself first. That kind of thinking. So the first work is, before you can even do anything else, is like, get the parts all together and on the same page. So you're creating safe places, maybe safe places for some really young parts, and some safe places for some adolescent parts, or whatever. And when we're all feeling safe and we can all be together and we can agree and we can be co-conscious, and that's a good place to be for that client. Like, I know when I hear myself saying this to myself, I don't need to kill myself. And that life is okay. And right now I'm safe. I have a safe environment and I'm okay now. And they can really embody that and feel safe. And that might be the point where I might do some soul retrieval. And it's not really soul fragments of each of the dissociative parts. I don't know how that works. I don't know what that picture looks like. But it's definitely some soul loss.
Yeah.
Right? Makes sense?
Yes. Yeah. It sounds like a lot of extraction has to occur too, and to some extent.
Yeah. Negative energies. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing that work. I mean, that's pretty profound work.
Yeah, I love it. And the shamanic work helped me. It helped me to feel more confident and helped me to conceptualize it. It just helped me in a lot of ways. The bigger picture.
Yeah. Yes.
So, yeah, it's very rewarding and very hard work and sometimes very heartbreaking work because you don't always have a win. People leave before they're done. And then you have to respect and honor that's part of their process.
Yes, that's true. That's another thing I think that people often have a misperception. They think, well, if I just can go to a shaman one time, this is going to miraculously cure this 30 years of this pattern that I've been having and these symptoms, and it really is a process. And ultimately, you've, again, given a lot of testimony to the power of the healing in your own life and also in your clients' lives. But ultimately, it's the client or the person that you're working with that's responsible for that healing, to accept it, to, attend to it.
I was gonna tell you one more thing. You might edit this out, but this is about have you ever done a session with Charles, like a shamanic?
I haven't, but I regret that now because he's winding down and So
just to tell you, because this might get edited because of this ridiculous sound, but it's really interesting that the way he does it is you sit across from each other, across from his drum around his drum, and he gives you 2 beaters and you both drum. And he just talks you through it. You don't close your eyes, or you can close your eyes if you want. And he just starts it out by calling in your helpers, your ancestors, and you're both drumming. And you just, and whatever comes up, you talk about. And he really just holds the space and you do all the talking. It's really a cool way to do it and different.
Yeah, it's very, I think, reflective of the shamanic counseling, the Harner counseling. Yes. Yeah. So you're taking that training, and you've been a student at the foundation for a couple years too. You've pretty much taken all the workshops, right? And then you've done the 2-week intensive, and now you're getting ready to do the 3-year. So you're really, do you have goals of teaching with them, or?
I do. I know Will. Do you know Will at the Cove? Will Fiorella? Yeah. So he said, we need you to come in and teach again this next quarter. And I said, well, I don't know what I'm going to teach. And then I thought, well, I finally emailed him. I said, how about if I teach using shamanic journeying to improve your creativity? So I may teach journeying. Okay.
All right. Yeah. What about through the foundation? Are you planning on?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if I feel confident enough to do it.
Yeah.
I don't see myself as an expert, and I feel like those people have. Charles has 20 plus years of experience of doing this, and I've only been doing it for maybe 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
I feel like a baby shaman.
Yeah. But in time, because they require you to have gone through everything basically. So you've met those prerequisites. Maybe in time, somebody's going to need to fill in that gap. Now that he's retiring, so
that's true, and I'm at the place now. I'm 58, and I'll work another 6 or 8 years, and I've been thinking about, well, what would I do in my retirement? Well, that's one possibility, is teaching for the foundation or teaching on my own, because I've been online looking at different people like Brant Secunda and Bill Oldo, the guy in South America, and there's a lot of people who have their own practices and their own teachings and their own courses. That's another possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How exciting. Well, I'm so honored to know you, Sue. Really. I adore you. So thank you for taking the time with me this morning, and our chat was really good. And if you don't mind, I'll put up your contact information, maybe a website. Do you
Sure.
want your phone number published, or?
Yeah, my phone number, definitely. The website, the only website I have right now is my therapy website, but they can contact me through there, or Psychology Today.
Okay.
But I am going to create a new business and new website for my shamanic practice.
All right. Well, I'll share that in case anybody wants to get a hold of you. You do distance sessions, so.
Yeah, I do.
I'll share that information.
Well, thank you. I really admire you too. I admire you, and I admire the way that you approach and conceptualize it too. I love you're very creative with it. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right. I'll see you later.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.